If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain how I found out about this. It's free. It's on your app store. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right now from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Please, I urge you, don't waste another minute. I wasted 3 years. I attended all kinds of events to learn all the steps. I was so confused, and it was right here. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Do it now. Good Saturday, April 17, 2021. I'm Sabah Fakhoury, your host of the Heart and Home podcast. Prince Philip was memorialized today. There was no military procession through Windsor, and the public saw Prince Philip's funeral ceremonies only on the BBC. Firing guns signaled the start of a nationwide minute of silence at 3 p.m. to remember his life. At his request, a bugle played Action Stallions at the end of the funeral service, a naval call traditionally used to summon a crew to battle, but also played at Royal Navy sailors' funerals. This funeral service is very much in line with the Duke's wishes. The coffin was moved by soldiers of the Queen's Company, 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, in a ceremonial procession from the state entrance of Windsor Castle to St. George's Chapel, which sits within the castle walls. Positioned on the grass in the quadrangle, just by the gate, were representative military units connected to Prince Philip. The bearer party placed the coffin in the Land Rover. During an 8-minute procession to the chapel, artillery guns were fired at 1-minute intervals from the east lawn of Windsor Castle. Upon arrival at the chapel, a rendition of God Save the Queen was played by a military band. Royal Marines carried the coffin out of the car, and then at 3 p.m. there was the minute's silence across the United Kingdom. Only 30 guests and those on duty in the chapel were allowed to enter. Inside the church, on cushions at the altar, were the Duke of Edinburgh's medals and his Field Marshal's baton, alongside insignia from the 2 countries of which he was born a prince, Denmark and Greece, his birthplace. The Queen sat alone for the service. At the end of the service, Prince Philip's coffin was interred in the royal vault at St. George's Chapel, alongside 24 other royals, including 3 kings of England. There was a pause on the Johnson & Johnson shots. Yesterday, a letter from 3 Johnson & Johnson employees involved in vaccine development was published in the New England Journal of Medicine that said there wasn't enough evidence to establish that the company's COVID-19 vaccine causes the rare blood clotting condition that led U.S. health officials this week to recommend a pause in its use. The Johnson & Johnson researchers wrote to the medical journal in response to a case report the journal published earlier this week describing the clotting condition in a 48-year-old woman in Nebraska, which developed 2 weeks after she received the J&J vaccine. She was critically ill at the time of the case report. The doctors who wrote the case report about the woman in Nebraska suggested that the rare clotting events, coupled with low platelets, could be related to the type of vaccine technology in the J&J vaccine known as viral vector. They noted that similar cases had been seen in recipients of the AstraZeneca's vaccine, which is also a viral vector vaccine. Last month, researchers in Germany and Norway said they found the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine could trigger an autoimmune reaction causing blood clots. European health officials said they had found possible links between the events and the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, though the shot's benefits exceed its potential risks. Back in this country, the federal government's recommendation to pause using Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine remains in place after an advisory panel put off a vote Wednesday on how to move forward following reports of a few cases of life-threatening blood clots. The Vaccine Advisory Committee is scheduled to review the matter later this month on Friday, April 23. That's next Friday. The CDC advisory group investigating rare cases of blood clotting relating to the J&J vaccine said it doesn't have enough information to determine whether the shot should be continued, discontinued, or recommended only for certain groups of the population. President Biden declared on Tuesday that even with a temporary loss of J&J's one-shot vaccine, which more than 7.2 million people have received, there is a huge supply of Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, enough that is basically 100% unquestionable for every single solitary American. The agencies said Tuesday they were investigating unusual clots that occurred in 6 women of the 7.2 million adults who received the shot. One of the patients died and another remains hospitalized in serious condition. Nationwide, federal officials expected to allocate about 26.5 million doses of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines combined this week, compared to with 1.5 million of J&J's. Currently, 23.1% of the U.S. population is fully vaccinated. A February poll by the Pew Research Center found that 30% of Americans said they don't plan on getting vaccinated, with the majority citing side effects as their main concern. Meanwhile, a small but growing number of colleges will require students to receive a COVID-19 vaccine to return to in-person on-campus learning. Last week, Duke University in North Carolina, Brown University in Rhode Island, and Syracuse University in New York joined Rutgers University in New Jersey and Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, that are requiring students be vaccinated. Several states have moved to restrict such requirements. Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis issued an executive order this month blocking businesses from requiring patrons to show so-called vaccine passports documentation that they have received the vaccine. Despite Texas Governor Greg Abbott issuing an executive order, quote, which stipulates that vaccines are voluntary for all state agencies. A&M is encouraging all faculty, staff, and students to get the vaccine. The latest numbers as of Thursday, that was published yesterday, 198,317,040 vaccine doses have been given so far in this country. 74,289 new U.S. cases were recorded on Thursday. 908 deaths in the U.S. were recorded on Thursday, and 565,289 total U.S. deaths. There are 31,495,924 total confirmed cases in the U.S., and worldwide 139,165,841, with 2,988,238 deaths. These, according to figures from Johns Hopkins University and vaccine figures from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. President Joe Biden on Wednesday formally announced his decision to withdraw American troops from Afghanistan before September 11, on the 20th anniversary of the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon that led the U.S. into its longest war. The deadline President Biden has set is absolute, with no potential for extension based on worsening conditions on the ground. Officials said after 2 decades of war, it was clear to the president that throwing more time and money at Afghanistan's problems wasn't going to work. Quote, "We cannot continue the cycle of extending or expanding our military presence in Afghanistan, hoping to create the ideal conditions for our withdrawal, expecting a different result," end quote, Biden said. "I am now the 4th president to preside over an American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats," he added. "I will not pass this responsibility to a 5th. In a sign, he views his remarks as a historic bookend to the prolonged conflict. He delivered them from precisely the same spot in the White House treaty room that President George W. Bush announced the start of the war on October 7, 2001. Afterward, he visited the section of Arlington National Cemetery where many of America's war dead from Afghanistan are buried. The former police officer who mistook her gun for a taser was charged with second-degree manslaughter in Daunte Wright's killing. People are still shaking their head, asking how could an officer of 26 years mistake a gun for a taser? It just doesn't make sense. I wanted to address that J-Lo and A-Rod are no longer. They announced on the Today Show Thursday morning that they've ended their engagement after they failed to fix their issues. Now, if you remember last month, there were reports that they had broken up after 2 years of being engaged, and then they quickly quashed that the next day, put out a statement, said they were working on some issues, and then A-Rod flew down to where J-Lo was filming in the Dominican Republic, and there were photos of them, but nothing materialized. They're done. In a joint statement, the couple said, "We are better as friends. We will continue to work together and support each other in our shared businesses and projects." The announcement days after J-Lo sparked breakup rumors when she shared photos of herself on her Instagram without her engagement ring on. Now, that's an example of finding your integrity, which is the topic of this week's podcast. I'm going to save that till tomorrow because it's a little longer than I had planned. But as a lead up to that, when you're in your second act, people start to rethink their life. And there is a column in the Wall Street Journal called Second Act. And there was a very good example of something that I wanted to share with you, since last week we talked about looking at your goals, your future, that this is a good opportunity for you to come out of the COVID-19 if you've lost your job, to rethink what you want to do. Well, here's a story. Laurel Labov, she had a job as a corporate vice president that required her to move 11 times. During that time, her and her husband renovated 8 homes that they had bought. When she realized she didn't want to spend her life in conference rooms and airplanes, she left her job, retired at 62, and started a business buying, renovating, and reselling homes in her hometown of Cape Elizabeth, Maine. She was a mechanical engineer by training, and she found her inspiration in Bob Vila's This Old House. Anybody that's on the East Coast is a big fan of his. I remember when I lived in Boston, I was stoked. I loved This Old House. It was one of the best shows, and I guess that is what Laurel did, is anytime she needed to learn something, she would turn to Bob Vila, she would watch the shows, teach herself, and now she's flipping houses, something she loves. Now, of course, she took some small business classes at night, she met with bankers, and worked on creating a company, which she called So Po Cottage. She did all that before she left her job and devoted herself full-time to home remodeling on houses. And she focuses on those that are built between 1890 and 1960. Now, her goal isn't to make a lot of money fast, she says. It's to breathe new life into a house and make it a beautiful home. She's so far renovated 17 homes in 9 years, and she's put in from 60 to 80 hours a week. Now, that is not a person who has retired. That is a person who loves getting up and going to work every day. Second acts look at various paths that people take in their 50s and beyond. If you're interested, there's a writer that's from Michigan that is called Halpert, but you can write to the Wall Street Journal at reports@wsj.com if you have a story that you'd like this freelance writer to cover in your second act. Now, I know that I keep saying that this is a good time for you to relook, and last week in episode 75 in Post-Pandemic Dreams, I shared how this spring would be a good time to consider doing something different. So many people are teaching online how to find your purpose, including Wayne Dyer in a free course through Hay House that's running this week. I think today I finished my 5th day, so there's just 2 more days left. Now, I've already done this course a couple of years ago. It's just a repeat of the exact same thing, but I love repeating and just seeing if there's anything that I missed. Some things I remember, other things I don't remember at all. So it's always good to go back over your material and then see if there's something that you might have missed. But I just wanted to remind you that in actuality, all of us know what our purpose is. It's inside of you. It's what you love. It's just hard for some of us to see how to make a career out of what we love. Let's take, for example, pet lovers, okay? You may have heard that there are such things as dog walkers, okay? But you think, you can't make a living doing that. In one of my favorite movies, Monster-in-Law, Jennifer Lopez was a dog walker. And she also worked answering phones and other side hustles. Then one day she meets a guy while on the beach walking dogs. Well, and then, the rest of the story is about this terrible mother-in-law. But anyways, it's a wonderful, and it's one of my favorite movies. But here's the deal. If you're young, you make ends meet. But for some reason, as we age, we think we have to have one job that pays all the bills. And if you prefer that, you might not be able to get that in today's fiercely competitive job market. So you might want to consider 2 or even 3 part-time jobs. Like if you put in 10 to 20 hours in one place, you could craft your own schedule and put in as few or as many hours as you want. If you enjoy baking, for example, perhaps you'd consider working in the mornings at a bakery. Then you have the rest of the day to do what you like. Perhaps work during busy periods at a florist. That combines 2 hobbies, baking and flower arranging. Or think about working at a garden center as a seasonal worker. Good workers are hard to find, and employers know this. If you have a good work ethic, you could write your own ticket. So don't consider that you just only have to look for a full-time job. Look at part-time work, look at seasonal work, think about what you love, try a couple different things. Hey, if you don't like it, well, you just say this is not for me. But how do you know if you don't try? You see, the thing is that when we peg ourselves at a specific salary and we think we have to make this and we can't take any less, you're boxing yourself in. And what you're doing is you're cutting out all the possibilities of doing work that you love. Remember the example that I told you of the man who had retired and it took him 3 years, but he finally got a job working for TJ Maxx at 66, and he worked until he was in his 90s? Now, I'm not saying you're going to have another career for another 30 years, but look at people do hire elderly workers. Some do discriminate against you in your age, but there are other businesses that look for elderly people, that they want to get you back into the workforce or to keep you in there. And they're not just looking to hire young kids. You know, my dad was just talking this morning about some of the workers. They show up when they want. Oh, they don't feel like coming in. Oh, I don't feel well. And they just don't want to work. That man, in the days when I was working in corporate America, that was grounds for dismissal. I mean, if you were late, you were written up. You got a warning, and then after a couple of times and they talked to you, you were gone. People don't put up with that anymore. Most people want a job. And for those that can't find a job, maybe you're looking in the wrong place, okay? Because when you're out there on the web looking, you don't know who's behind those ads. A lot of times they just put them out there just because they need to, because they need to let people know that they have a job opening, but maybe they already have somebody in mind, like an internal candidate. So hey, if you come in at a lower level and you're on the inside, if your company that you're working for promotes from within, then you have a better chance of getting that job that you want if you're with that company. Because hiring somebody from the outside usually means they don't have anybody inside that wants to take that job. For instance, when I was working in the legal profession, all the girls that had worked at the law firm knew all the bad bosses and the good bosses. So they would pick and choose who they wanted to work for. And if nobody internally wanted to work for somebody who had an opening, then they would have to go to the outside. So the person coming in would get usually the worst, the toughest, and the most difficult problem child of the law firm. And I'm not saying this as, it happens everywhere, but it's happened to me so many times that I'm convinced that that is what's happening. One time, I actually was working for a boss, had my own partner, and another partner in the same department had gone through so many secretaries that they couldn't get anybody else to fill it. Not from inside, not from outside. So guess what? HR came to me and said, "He's yours." I didn't even interview for the job. They just stuck me with him. And I thought, oh no, this is a setup. They're going to fire me for sure. Well, I lasted at least 4 years. I did more than I was supposed to do. I got written up so many times, it didn't matter. I kept saying, look if I'm insubordinate, then just fire me. But you're not going to fire me because nobody else is going to do this job. And finally, one day, we ended up having a dispute and we went head to head, and I was not going to back down. I was not going to get written up anymore. I was not going to take it anymore from this person who had overstepped his bounds And then, you have to keep your mouth quiet. You can't say anything because, the boss is always right. HR never backs you up. And I just said, you know what? I don't care anymore. Well, that's what I want to talk to you about. Integrity. Martha Beck has written a book called The Way of Integrity. I was on a 2-hour course with her today through the Omega Institute, and I'm going to go through the book with you. I'm almost done listening to it on audio, and then she walked us through the whole book. So that's going to be tomorrow, and I hope that you'll join me for that, because I know so many of you are going to be in a similar situation at work where you just want to please everybody, where you say yes to everybody, whatever people say you do. And you know what? After a while, you realize, hey, this is not serving you. And maybe you don't need to get along and keep doing what people want you to do, because what happens is you think that this is what's expected of you. This is the norm. This is the culture. And this is what you're supposed to do. But you don't have to do it. Like I said before, you accepted that job. You accepted that salary. And you are not stuck there. So you can get yourself unstuck. And if somebody rubs you the wrong way, then you know what? Sometimes it's better to just say adios, amigos, and you're out of there. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is you end up walking into similar situations at other companies, and you repeat the same process. Unless you switch to a different industry, unless you're in an area that you love what you're doing, or you're your own boss. So just consider that if you something just doesn't feel right, and you know that there's more that you can do, and you know that you just can't do it anymore, then consider listening to tomorrow's episode on Heart and Home. You're going to learn a lot. For the Heart and Home podcast, I'm Sabah Fakhoury. I'll talk to you tomorrow.